first thing that I'd like to talk about is essentially a historical context and a philosophical background of why we are talking about integration of aesthetics and integration of and evolution of high-rise buildings, right? Now, the first thing that you think about when you talk about high-rise buildings is the modernist influence that Le Corbusier and Mies van der Rohe, they promoted the idea of high-rise buildings as symbols of modernity. And a house is a machine to live in. That was what Le Corbusier had said, and that is a very clean, efficient, machinic sort of approach to design a high-rise building, which is also something that is very necessary for a high-rise building, because a high-rise building is essentially a machine. So if you cannot get away from efficiency in terms of that, so that's fine. However, this often neglected cultural identity, and what I would like to talk about today is how can you make a cuboid long, tall, serrated, whatever, with materials and so on, but it can still talk to its surroundings. It can be of the people, for the people, and to some extent by the people as well. You have a lot of twin towers that have viewing galleries and so on at the top. Then the one World Trade Center, what do you call it, Tower One, that has several floors of public spaces right at the top of the tower, so in New York. So that is a wonderful way to remember 9/11, what happened, and so on and so forth. So that makes it a part of the city. Then public amenities at ground floor is what I was talking about. Those are so important because you can lose some square footage, but you can soften the impact of how the mass hits the ground. And in a lot of cities, you'll see in the world that you have skyscrapers, and then you have markets and so on and so forth, restaurants and cafes and so on the ground floor, and then you have metro station that is right under that. So that means that the public space uh, sort of extends above the city level, at the street level, and then the skyscraper sort of starts above that. This is also important. We always talk about gradients, public privacy gradients, for example. This is very important. At what level do your public spaces stop and your private spaces start? So that is one distinction that you make. One is a distinction of access, and one is a distinction of free and paid. How many services do you give which will attract people which are free in a skyscraper, and how many services and where are those services which you give that are paid for? So the architect has to find a balance between what is free and paid and what is public and private. And that is what integrates the aesthetics and integrates the skyscraper into the culture of a city. Then skyscraper is an exercise in structural design. So sometimes you have these examples of brilliant buildings that have been designed in such a way that the structure itself is done in a way that it becomes a landmark. Like the Gherkin in London is one that I can think of. Then Norman Foster's Hearst Tower in London. Uh, in that structure it's literally like a shard, and it is so against the context it is in that it has become a symbol of an anti-context building, which in itself is a good thing. We are talking about it, which is what probably the architect wanted. So that's great. Then, um, then you have Norman Foster's building in New York, which has a diagonal facade. I'm forgetting the name. I think the Hearst Tower in New York. That has a diagonal facade, which is a very a landmark facade again. That structure itself is what we remember it by. Vertical greenery, like all of Woha. Woha is the architectural firm based out of, I think, Hong Kong or Singapore, and they have amazing ways in which they have used green facades in tall buildings, and those buildings have actually become like symbols of what Singapore is, which is, I think, the highest level at which an architect can aspire for his design to reach, right? And contextual responsiveness is, of course, the last thing, where design should respond to its skyline, which is also important, which the shard does not. And for example, the Shangri-La Hotel in London is an example. And I think a lot of the hotels and buildings on the Bund in Shanghai are done in such a way that it maintains that 120-year history, off the Bund in Shanghai, which is Riverside Promenade, and other buildings. And the last thing is, of course, balancing cost and aesthetic goals. As an architect, we have to be very clear about a balance between what we want to do, what should be done, and what is actually possible. So, as somebody very wisely said, that out of cost, quality, and time, you can get positive outcomes in two of them. Then the third will suffer. So, as an architect, you have to understand, you have to build a building that meets your FSI requirements, but also has to keep in mind that there are certain goals that a building will have, and we cannot forget about where the building is standing, for whom it is being built, and the impact that the building has on its surroundings. Do not want to create a building that creates a dead zone around it, because it is too intimidating for people to come close to it. That is the worst sort of urban design project to do. So that's my 10 minutes worth of stuff I had to say on this. Thank you.